My talk today is with National Book Award winner Nathaniel Philbrick. He's the author of In the Heart of the Sea, Away Offshore, Bunker Hill, Valiant Ambition, In the Hurricane's Eye, and many more. Hi, Nat. How are you doing?
Good, Tim, as well as can be, I guess, under these strange times.
Yeah, exactly. I was so excited to talk to you because, we are truly living through history right now. And as a historian, I don't know if your brain is kind of going so many ways of how will future historians look back at this time and what do you think that they would write about?
Very good question. There have been pandemics in the past, and some of our great literature has come from that, Defoe and all sorts of things. And, so it's happened before and it's going to happen again. Frighteningly, who knows, this could become, a more regular thing, but certainly unlike anything, our generation has ever seen. And I don't know, the one thing I've learned about history is when people are in the middle of the circumstances, they really don't know where it's headed, and they don't really know what sense to make out of it. And but if they were, journal or whatever, that will be very helpful once there is some distance. But history really requires some perspective before you can begin to put it in any kind of make any kind of sense out of it. So I don't know. I'm spending my days in the 18th century with George Washington. So so it's, and he went through a terrible yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia that killed a lot larger percentage of the population than we're seeing. So hey, I don't know. I'm just like the rest of you. I'm scared, I'm bored, and all, and everything else.
Those future historians, they'll have emails, videos, this Zoom meeting to look back on. And there's obvious benefits for that when they're researching and reporting. You really have, when you wrote books like In the Heart of the Sea and your Revolutionary War trilogy, you really just had written materials. Are there benefits to just having written materials as opposed to this wealth of knowledge that now we have that people can look back on history and report on?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very different kind of history in the future because, none of us are writing letters anymore there's not the beautiful prose they were writing in the 18th century. And you're right, there's video, there's and a lot more kind of evidence in a way. What it will add up to in terms of how it will, history will be written remains to be seen. I delight in the words of finding, wonderful phrases from the past that can, really provide an insight as well as, almost have a poetic aspect to them. When it comes to, all of this different kind of evidence, it'll be very, very interesting. In many ways, I think it will put perhaps even more on the shoulders of the historian to provide the voice, to provide the perspective that gives it some kind of thematic coherence and sense, which is the great challenge, I think, because we live life fragmented in a fragmented fashion without any idea where it's all going and all of that. And it's only after the fact that we can begin to see how it began, what happened in the middle of it, and where it all was headed. And right now we're just in the midst of it and trying to hang on.
Maybe in 100 years, someone will be watching this clip, and maybe that'll be wisdom for them. It's not the craziest thing.
I don't know. Yeah, the only wisdom I've ever derived from history is a sense of how little any of us know.
What fascinates you most about history?
Trying to see life through someone else's eyes in the past. I'm just fascinated with, we have I grew up thinking, what I'm experiencing in life is what is what everybody experiences. But the older I get, the more I realize is how each of us has their own perspective, very definite perspective, and how each time has had its own point of view. And I don't know, I've always been fascinated with, whether it's old movies or things like that, of how it once was. And I know I was not a history major in college. I was an English major. And I remember was moving to Nantucket and getting into the history of the island. And what was fascinating for me was to be on this 14-mile island and read accounts of someone who was on the same 14-mile island maybe as many as 200 years ago, and see what they were seeing and hear what they were feeling, and even have the opportunity to go where that was. I don't know, it just was infinitely interesting to me, to try to identify what that experience was like. And I guess it's an attempt to try to find the universality of experience, not in terms of what was, what is now, and what's going to happen in the future.
So 2020 is the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower sailing from England here to the New World. And your book, your 2007 book, Mayflower Voyage, Community, and War, is kind of an ode to America's beginning in this story. For those who haven't picked it up, are there some tidbits that you can kind of give us a taste of what you were trying to get? I mean, there's probably so many different themes from that time, but what does your book really dive into?
Yeah, well, just a little bit of background. I write these books not because I'm an expert on the topic. Quite the opposite. And this Mayflower really evolved from working on my first work of history way offshore about Nantucket. And in researching that, I felt I needed to really look at the history of New England, just to put the island in context, in its proper context. And I read William Bradford, his of Plymouth Plantation. He was the primary governor of Plymouth during the Pilgrim era. And it was amazing. It's this incredible book. And I had grown up thinking nothing was more boring than the Pilgrims. We all got it in the Thanksgiving pageants and all that, and candles of pilgrims with, that kind of thing. And I realized, wow, there's so much more to this story that so many people look to as the sort of mythic origin of this country. I would really like to figure out what actually happened. And so that's what led me on that quest. And, I sort of thought at the beginning it was going to lead to the first Thanksgiving, and that was going to be the big payoff. But I realized that you couldn't look at that without thinking about what was the ultimate legacy of that. And to understand where it all would head, you had to go to the second generation, the children and grandchildren of the Pilgrims, and the terrible war that they fought with the Native Americans, and realize whatever promise was contained in the first Thanksgiving was eliminated when the English went to war with the Wampanoag. And so I realized that this was not the take most of us have on the Pilgrims, which tends to be kind of an inspirational thanks for all of this. It became a darker story, but I think one that is kind of truer to what would be the future of this country, which would really be defined by its movement west.
I think that's what fascinates me about history the most, is that we all know these surface level things about stuff that happened in the past, and then when you really dive into it, we don't even know the half of it. And so that's what I think fascinates me, is that it's so much, like you said, that this goes deeper than just that one thing you thought you were going to be researching. Do Americans now have anything in common with those ancestors that came over? Do we have anything? Is there anything we have in common with them?
Yes, there is a universality of human experience. Many of us today are immigrants, as were the Pilgrims. Many of us have to start new beginnings in what is, for our are, you know, for all intents and purposes for us, a new land, with peoples we've never, you know, couldn't really even imagine. That said, I think there is a tendency to try to see stories from the past, particularly if it's the founding fathers or the Pilgrim fathers, to, you know, to see it almost as a metaphor for today. You know, what would George Washington do or something like that? And I think that's really dangerous. It was a very different time. In many ways, the Pilgrims, you know, I know a lot of Pilgrim descendants who, you know, are really into the fact that they're descended from the Pilgrims. But that doesn't mean you really share anything other than genetic material.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very different time. These guys were religious fanatics. If, you know, they showed up today, I mean, they really defined their world, as you know, their spiritual community. And it didn't mean, you know, they were in search of a religious freedom for themselves, but they did not want to give that same freedom to anyone else. And so, you know, the Quakers show up and they get hanged from Boston Common, that kind of thing. So it's, you know, you got to be careful. But that said, I think there's a lot in that story that relates to where we are. I mean, that's what makes these stories, that's what makes it history, something that should always, there's no old stories in history. I mean, anyone who says, oh, no, not another book about this or that. No, there will always be other books about this, because with every year, people's perspectives are changing. And when they look back to that past, they will be doing it with different eyes and finding different things. And so I think that's the important part of history, that you inevitably search for what is helpful to you in the past. Not that you can change the past or twist it to meet your own, you know, contemporary philosophical ends, which happens quite a bit. But you do it to sort of, for me, it's finding out what it was like and relating it to what it is to be a human being.
I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower, and they were drawing parallels to, in the future, if there is some time that a group of people from here have to travel to Mars to live in, or start a new world.
Yeah.
And I don't really know if there's a question here for you in there, but I didn't know if you had anything to say on that, or if you heard that that talk. It was just very interesting.
Well, funny, I hadn't heard that talk, but one of the books that inspired me to write Mayflower was The Martian Chronicles, because you read The Martian Chronicles, it's basically the Pilgrim experience, and you know, that whole you know, dealing with the other, and you know, how those perspectives change as, you know, the new people sort of put in roots, and all that kind of thing. So yes, you know, I think there's all sort, you know, that's the thing about science fiction. It's, yeah, it's supposedly about the future, but it's about the here and now. It's just doing interesting what ifs. And you know, for me, that's what makes history cool, is that you know, what many of us regard as science fiction actually happened in the past. You know, it was a different time. It was, in its way, you know, they're, you know, the science fiction sort of, you know, the trope is that, you know, the technology has gotten so wacky that, you know, all this is happening, where in the past it's the opposite. You know, the technology is goes in the other direction. And but I think in many ways it's the same kind of fascination of something that's different but remarkably the same.
You touched a little bit on this in the beginning, but can you tell us what you're working on right now?
Yeah. I am trying to finish a first draft of a book with the title of, well, tentative title, I don't know, who knows what it will ultimately be called, but Travels with George. When George Washington became president, realized he was a leader of 13 essentially independent states, that he really needed to do something to create a sense of solidarity. So he realized there was no one more popular in the country, if not the world, than George Washington. I should probably use that popularity to actually see the people, learn about what's happening to them, and pull this country together by visiting every state. And that's what he did. He went on a series of road trips that took him all the way to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He even got to Kittery, Maine during the harbor tour of Portsmouth Harbor. And he got as far south as Savannah, Georgia. And the southern tour was amazing. It was almost 2,000 miles, took him 3 months. He was not traveling in Air Force One. It was a horse-drawn carriage. He stayed in taverns, refused to stay in people's houses. And this was when taverns were not really, these were not hotels by any means. But anyway, so I was also, after writing 3 books about the American Revolution, getting a little itchy to do something a little different. And I really wanted to just sort of get out of my office and go places. So, and one of my favorite books of all time is Travels with Charlie, in which John Steinbeck goes with his dog and explores the country. And I thought, well, I would really like to explore the country with my dog, Dora, and my wife, Melissa, and follow George. And so, we're following George. So this is a book that's as much about our journey as it is George's. And it was an incredible road trip for Melissa and I. I mean, it was really almost 7 different road. We cut it up into manageable segments, but it was a really great experience for us as a couple and as Americans, really. And so I'm writing that, and it's been fun trying to interweave our story with George's and back and forth.
You spent a long time with George Washington now. That's like a lot of books. Is there what fascinates you so much about him?
Well, I did not see it coming. I mean, before I wrote Bunker Hill, I just thought of George, like the Pilgrims, what can be more boring than George Washington? There he is, looking glumly from the $1 bill. What? And but no, he's introduced to the reader in Bunker Hill. This is not George in a white-haired. He's red-haired, fiery, and pissed off that he's having to deal with all these New Englanders. You can't blame him for that. But and this is just a different kind of George. And with each book, it was like, wow, this is deep, man. And so when I did finish in the Hurricane's Eye about the year of Yorktown, I was done with bloodshed and violence. Well, at least wartime kind of thing. But I just couldn't kick George. I just really wanted to see how he would deal with all this. And I was sick of him as a general. I'm not even that interested. Yes, I'm interested in him as a president, but what's been fascinating is seeing George as a traveler, someone on the road. Yeah. And I think, we can all relate to that, going to lousy hotels or a tavern and having accidents along the way, which Melissa and I did, that kind of stuff. So it was humanizing and interesting, and it made me realize that there are parts of the country where he went that haven't changed that much in all this time, and so it was really fun.
Are you finding it hard to be creative right now? And I guess the second part of that question is what's going on influencing the storyline at all?
Yeah, well, I was about 3/4 of the way, close to 3/4 of the way through when all of this hit, and sort of cruising along, and then all of this hit, and part of me thinks, well, this is what I do. My life really isn't going to change in lockdown. It's it's the way I am. But no, it's I defy anyone to sit there and try to think about anything without worries, an urge to find out what's happening out there creeping in. And, and then I, begin to read, it's hard. I'm, I'm progressing, but it's, I thought, hey, this will give me a leg up. I'll finish early. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's not gonna
Even
happen.
when I try to start reading, I'll read a chapter. I'll read the first sentence of a chapter, and it'll be three people together, and I'll be like, What are you doing together? You shouldn't. You should." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I have to." So our minds are just
Right.
so focused on this right now. So anyone creative trying to produce something, I feel like it has to be difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I need to finish this thing. And then, when this comes out in a year, what will the world be like? I mean, what are we going to want to read? Who knows? I'm, it, there's a part of me that can see, I'm getting very wistful. Boy, that was fun to be on the road and meeting new people and all of that. And,
I think a travel guide will be really good for people since they might not be able to travel. So I think it'll be a
yeah,
a good way to.
Well, the past is a kind of a vicarious pleasure in any event, and this might be, I don't know. Well, it is. I just realized I was beginning to think, well, should I, go back and sort of, no, I just need to get this through and see, where it all is. I'm trying to write something that is, will live beyond any specific moment. A book that hopefully you can pick up in 10 years time and read it and not go, oh boy, is this dated? And yet when you're writing, you're in the middle of your own time in ways that you don't even know. And so it's going to seep in there. And I'm sure it already is seeping in there.
Because you're right. This is, it's such a watershed moment for us right now. And no one knows what will be the lasting effects of this. Will we go right back to normal? I don't really see how that could be possible, but it's an interesting thing. I think another, I'm seeing all on social media is a lot of people are trying to reread or read classics. And for this interview, I wore my Moby Dick t-shirt.
Good man. Good man.
And you wrote a book called Why Read Moby Dick. And I remember back to my high school lit class, and my teacher, Mr. Grunholtz, he held it up and he always said, if you ever can't sleep, just try reading Moby Dick, which I feel like really turned me off from that book. It's always stuck with me. But then when I moved to Nantucket and I read In the Heart of the Sea, I was like, I have to give this a shot. Well, I will say I've tried, but I think I need you right here on this interview to tell me and anyone watching, why should we read Moby Dick?
You should read Moby Dick, particularly now, because Melville wrote Moby Dick a decade, not even a decade before the outbreak of the Civil War. And it was already the fissures were forming. His father-in-law, the father of his mother, was a judge involved in one of the first cases involving the new Fugitive Slave Act. And there were riots in Boston. The judge was burned in effigy. You could just tell America was going to fall apart. And yes, this is about a whaling voyage, but it's about a whaling voyage going to the end of the world, where you have a crazy demonic captain on a personal quest to kill the white whale and destroy everyone in the process if need be. And so Moby Dick is about a society on the verge of a catastrophe. And that's one of the reasons why the book gets rediscovered with every generation, because we are always living on the verge of a catastrophe. And, World War II, people interpreted Ahab as Hitler. And, for me, it is a metaphysical survival guide, because you have the voice of Ishmael, who will be the one survivor of the crew of the Pequod. And he has, and he admits that he was seduced by Ahab, but it's no accident he is the one who makes it through, because he has a worldview that encompasses good, evil, with a joy and a capacity for great sadness, but with a sense of humanity that is, all enduring. That's why he is the one that is picked up after the Pequod sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And so I think, and you shouldn't sit down and say, I'm going to read Moby Dick today. I would say 1 to 2 chapters a day, and do it. And I don't know, before you go to sleep. I don't know about you. If anything I'm reading before I go to sleep, I might get the first paragraph, but I don't. After that, I'm rereading it the next night. But I think it's, for me, when I'm really, really tense, I'll pick up Moby Dick, because Ishmael went through it. I mean, he went down with Ahab in the Pequod and made it through. And this is his message in a bottle. And I think it's a message that all of us should read, because right now we are. I don't know about you, but I am feeling like
we're going down.
I'm aboard the hell ship headed for who knows what.
Yeah.
And
well, that is very convincing, because I do like, some people like to read for distraction, and I really like to read to reflect on things that I'm going through, and that's what I'm really looking for right now. So that was very convincing.
Good.
Speaking of In the Heart of the Sea, that was made into a movie not so long ago. What did they get right in how you envisioned it, and what did they get wrong?
Well, hey, it's a movie, but no, I have to admit, when I first saw the screenplay, which was written quite soon after the book came out, I was, not happy with it, because it seemed to me like Jaws with whales, where the whale follows them. What's going on here? And then there's some interest in making it into a movie, but nothing happened. And 13 years passed, and I sort of forgot about it. And let's say my sensitivity to how how the movie was going to deal with the book had was less than it had been. And by that phase, hey, it becomes a movie terrific. And so when Chris Hemsworth of Thor fame attached himself to the book, whatever that means, I began to think, well, hey, if
it is what it is.
It is what it is. And if people see this movie and haven't read the book, maybe they'll read the book. And the other thing really made me see it in a different light was talking to Ron Howard, who admitted that he had agreed to direct the film before actually having read the book. But having read the book, he realized there was a lot of differences there. And you
didn't tell him the book is always better than the movie?
No, I don't tell Ron Howard anything. No, but
I guess I wouldn't either.
No, and he was great. He was talking about, because he typically, when he gets a project, digs into the screenplay, and he did with this. He hired Peter Morgan, British screenwriter who did The Queen, the Crown series on Netflix. Frost Nixon he had done Rush with Ron Howard, the previous movie. Well, anyways, and we had a fascinating lunch, the three of us, in the captain's cabin of the Charles W. Morgan, the last remaining wooden whale ship at Mystic Seaport. How cool is that? And I remember Peter Morgan, who is a very sardonic fellow, saying to me, "You're going to hate what I do to your book. You're going to hate it." And I said, no, at this stage, whatever. And I have to say, the changes that they made were all for the good, and really gave Captain Pollard more of I hate to say fleshing out in this context, but I will.
Yeah.
um, and so by the time I first saw a screening of the movie with my son Ethan in New York, I was in, man. It's a good movie. And as a sailor, and I know I've gotten this from a lot of sailors who it's a really Ron Howard does an excellent job of capturing the sea, what it's like to be in the midst of a storm, what it's like to be out there in a little boat. It's what he's created just in terms of a document of what it was like to be to kill a whale is amazing. And so hey, I'm very pleased that Ron Howard ended up turning it into a movie.
Yeah, you should be. Is there a person or topic after George Washington and this travel book that you could see yourself going, or is it too early to say?
No, actually, I am in the midst of a 2-book deal, so I know what the next project will be, barring who knows, barring a global pandemic. But uh,
that used to be funny, and now
yeah, I know. A little pandemic humor. It just doesn't seem to have the same.
Yeah, jokes are hard right now, but I guess I laugh.
But no, I'm one of the books I've written that people have seen as a departure, the book they always ask, well, why the heck did you do that, was The Last Stand, about the Battle of Little Bighorn. And in many ways, I had the most fun writing that book. I took an extra year to spend out in the West. I love being out there. I was a kid who spent summers on the East Coast. I had never been out West, never seen. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I had never seen, the real West. And so it was just, to discover there's another planet in the middle of our country was amazing, and I really miss it. And so I wanted to somehow begin to sort of move in that direction. I also sort of miss the maritime stuff. Anyways, it all led me to write to the topic of the gold rush, the California gold rush. And the way I'd like to get into it is from a Nantucket perspective, because it was just after the Great Fire of 1846. Whaling was going downhill, and these were very adventuresome, dynamic people on Nantucket, and they learned about the gold rush, took their whale ships, packed them full of prospectors, rounded the Horn, and abandoned them at the Golden Gate. And Folger Coffey was a Nantucketer who realized you don't make money in the gold fields, you make it by providing the prospectors with stuff to eat and drink, that kind of thing. And so that's what I'm doing. That's my next topic. I'm not quite sure specifically where it's all going to go, but
that's so exciting, especially with the Nantucket, with adding the Nantucket theme to it too.
Yeah, because what everybody has images of wagon trains going across the plains, but a very, very significant number of people went by water. And so, there was all sorts of immigrant ship stuff happening, prospector ship stuff happening. And so in many ways, it's a maritime tale. So this was a topic where I could combine my interest in returning to the West with my interest in returning to the sea. And so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, perfect fit. Okay, so I always like to do speed rounds with authors where I ask you some of your favorite things. So, and then we can wrap up here.
Okay.
So what was your favorite book as a kid?
Johnny Tremain.
Favorite novel?
Moby Dick.
Okay, give me a second one. Do you have a second one?
Yes. Absalom by William Faulkner.
Favorite true story?
Favorite true story?
Or nonfiction?
Nonfiction. I don't read much of it, to tell you the truth, other than what I'm working on. I really liked Into Thin Air.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, back then. That was really cool.
Favorite moment in history? I feel like that would be tough for you, but
Yeah, I don't have favorite moments in history. It's whatever oh yeah, okay. My favorite moment in history is whatever I'm writing a book about now.
perfect. Book you've read multiple times.
Moby Dick, but also Absalom, and um, probably the one I most enjoy just from a pure writerly point of view is The Great Gatsby.
Love that. Is there a book you wish you had written?
No, I'm happy with what I got.
Do you have a favorite book of yours?
No, it's yes, whatever I'm working on.
And what are you reading right now?
I am reading P.G. Wodehouse, Bertie and Jeeves novels. They're English, funny.
They're perfect for right now.
Oh, it talk about an antidote. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nat. I really appreciate this. You are always so gracious and giving to the bookstores and to me, and I thank you for taking your time to talk about these things. And like I said, I was really excited to get your perspective on just as a historian, everything that's going on, but also just, I mean, there's a lot of anniversaries. It was Herman Melville's 200th birthday last year, 400th. So a lot of your books are kind of coming to these kind of newfounded interest in them. So thank you so much for taking the time. And please hang in there and say hi to Melissa for me.
I will. And Tim, great to have you on this island.
Thank you.
What you've done for not only the book festival, but for books and authors is really greatly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon.
Yes.